Welcome to Time Traveling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every episode of Doctor Who right from the very beginning. I'm Paddy.
And I'm Tricia. This week we reach the end of our journey with the Fifth Doctor in the Caves of Androzani. As usual, we're discussing the Doctor, the companions and villains, and give your thoughts on the story as a whole.
I would also like to hear your thoughts on this story. So in order to join in the discussion, you can check us out at Time Team, that's TIMETEAMP, on Facebook, X and Instagram, or as we call it, Twix. Or you can email us at timetravelingteam@teamproductions.com. So it's taken us a small bit of time to get here, but here we are.
This is the end.
Oh, if only we could get Adele's licensing to sing.
Yeah, no. For now, you have my horrible voice instead. As we do, Paddy, for the first time in 2025, will you please give us the story recap?
I will. Part 1. The TARDIS lands on the volcanic plains of the uninhabited Androzani Minor, and the Doctor and Peri go outside to take a look at their surroundings. The Doctor notices patches of fused glass sand and says that it is a result from the rockets of a short-range ship, most likely from Androzani Major. He then notices tracks of a scout vehicle both leading and returning to the site, and he decides to go investigate. As they approach a cave system, the Doctor tells Peri that the core of the planet is made of superheated mud that flows to the surface when its orbit takes us close to Androzani Major due to the gravitational pull. They go into one of the caves, and Peri falls into a crevice as they look around, landing in a decaying patch of vegetation. The Doctor helps her out and says they need to be careful as they continue on into the mist-shrouded tunnels. As they go on, Peri asks the Doctor about the celery stalk he wears in his jacket, and he informs her that it turns purple when it comes into contact with a type of gas that is lethal to Time Lords. They eventually enter a larger tunnel containing a cache of gas-firing weapons and explosives. Peri says that she thought the planet was uninhabited, but the Doctor stops by a pair of dice that he saw on the floor and says that they are still warm. They then hear the sounds of approaching boots and they take cover, but are apprehended by a large group of armed men in uniform. Their capture is reported back to the home base, where Major Salatine informs its leader, General Chalak, of the presence of the weapons cache as well as the Doctor and Peri. Chalak is glad at the news, saying that it would further weaken the rebel forces led by Sharish Jek. Salatine says that he has taken the precaution of ordering anti-gas suits to be worn in case the rebels launch an attack. He also says that another soldier has disappeared in one of the tunnels after being mysteriously attacked. Before Chalak can respond, the Doctor and Peri are brought into the room. The Doctor responds flippantly to Chalak's grandiose attitude, but Chalak says that anyone involved in supplying the weapons to the rebels would be executed. Peri says that they are innocent, and Chalak says that if they cooperate, he will show them mercy. However, he grows frustrated when they do not give him the answers that he wants, leading the Doctor to berate him for his obtuseness. He then begins to say neither of them are feeling well, but they are interrupted by a message from Chalak's superior, and they are placed into another room to wait for Chalak's return. Chalak turns on a view screen and is greeted by Morgus, who demands to know what Chalak has found out from his prisoners. Chalak says that he has not begun to do a proper interrogation yet, which leads Morgus to berate him for his poor leadership and failure to locate the rebel forces hiding in the tunnels. He demands them to speak to the Doctor and Peri himself, but shows disgust at their appearance and orders them to be taken away again. He apologizes to Chalak for earlier rebuking him, saying that he wishes that he could be assisting him in person. He then orders for the Doctor and Peri to be executed. When Chalak says that he promised them clemency in exchange for information, Morgan says that the public will not stand for any collaboration. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation is being monitored by a masked man who comments on Peri's beauty. Chalak apologizes to Doctor and Peri, saying that he does believe that they are innocent, but he is powerless to overturn Morgus's ruling. The Doctor asks how Morgus, who is the chief director of a mining company, has so much power, and Chalak says that he has bribed most of the ruling council. Salatine enters and reports that a squad of troops are being attacked in one of the nearby tunnels, and Chalak orders the garrison to be mobilized. He then tells Salatine to place the Doctor and Peri in the brig to await their execution. In the brig, the Doctor says that something seems strange about Salatine before recalling that Chalak said the rebels were using Android. Peri morosely says that it doesn't matter, as they will soon be executed. The Doctor apologizes to Peri for their predicament, saying that his curiosity has always been his downfall. He then asks how her rash from the vegetation patch is, and she says it is starting to blister, and he notices that he is doing the same. He then goes back to wondering about why Morgus was so eager to have them killed before recalling his comments about the near-eye refinery that Chalak's forces recaptured from the rebels. He says that he has never heard of the substance it produces, Spectrox, and wonders what it could be used for. Peri then draws his attention to preparations for the execution outside, and neither of them notice a panel in the wall open behind them. Meanwhile, on Androzani Major, Morgus meets with the council president and gives him a small quantity of Spectrox. Together they talk about its miraculous rejuvenated properties and how it extends the lifespan of whoever takes it. The president then turns the topic of conversation to the conflict with the rebel forces and the effect it is having on the production of Spectrox. The president says that he is considering agreeing to Charles Jack's terms, but Morgus objects to this, saying that they can't give in to terrorism. The president comments that he can see why Morgus is opposed to the conflict ending, as it will reduce the market value of the Spectrox his company is providing. Before Morgus can respond to these allegations, they are interrupted by Morgus' secretary, who says that the Doctor and Peri are about to be executed. They watch via view screen as the Doctor and Peri are dressed in ceremonial red robes, and Chalak asks them if they have any last words, but they defiantly state their innocence. Chalak then orders for them to be blindfolded before ordering the firing squad to shoot them. Part 2. Morgus switches off the video feed and the president questions the sense of killing the prisoners, echoing Chalak's earlier comments. He then comments on the fact that many of the rebels are made up of the unemployed caused by Morgus' company closing plants. Morgus suggests sending them to labour camps, and the president says that he will consider it, but as he leaves, he highlights the fact that the camps are run by Morgus as well, thereby creating free labour. Meanwhile, back in the caves, Chalak examines the bodies of the Doctor and Peri and discovers that they are actually android duplicates, having been swapped out with the real versions when Charles Jack helped them escape via the hidden panel in the cell. At that moment, the Doctor and Peri are brought to Jack's hidden base, where they are greeted by the masked leader of the rebels. The Doctor thanks him for their rescue and says that they will leave shortly, but Jack says that they must remain with him from now on. He tells them that he would have Salatine bring them food, revealing that the one with Chalak is an android duplicate. Peri demands to know why he is keeping them there, and Jack says that he is relieved at having intelligent company after so many years, but accidentally reveals his attraction to Peri in the process. The Doctor gives a flippant response to this, leading Jack to say that he has no compunction about killing the Doctor if need be. He says that he will keep Peri beautiful forever as his eternal companion with the use of Spectrox, saying that he controls the entire supply on Androzani Minor. The Doctor and Peri say that Chalak's forces will stop him, but Jack says that he knows every move that Chalak makes. He says that the guerrilla war he is operating will stop the flow of Spectrox to Androzani Major, and the people will demand that Jack's demands be obeyed. Peri asks what the terms are, and he says that he will give back the Spectrox in exchange for Morgus. Jack leaves, and after a short while, the real Salatine arrives with food. The Doctor and Peri try to get on friendly terms with him, but he rebuffs their overtures. The Doctor starts experiencing a severe cramp, and Peri says that she had them earlier. Salatine recoils at this and asks if they encountered a Spectrox nest. The Doctor tells some of their fall into the vegetation patch, and Salatine gives an ironic laugh as he says that Jack will be cheated of his eternal companions. He reveals that they have contracted an incurable fatal disease called Spectrox toxemia. He says that raw Spectrox is lethal to humans, and androids are used to bring it to the refineries. He says that the vegetation patch was the remains of a Spectrox nest belonging to the bats native to the planet. He says that the majority of them were destroyed by the androids. Peri says that there must be an antidote, and Salatine casually says that the only way to get any antidote is by milking the queen of the colony, but they have all gone down to the lower levels where there is no oxygen. He also says that there is a creature in the tunnels that has been attacking soldiers, but no one has seen what it looks like. The Doctor asks how long they have left to live, and Salatine says that 2 days at most. The Doctor tells Peri to follow him, but Salatine says Jack's androids will kill them if they attempt to leave. He says that the androids are programmed to kill humans on sight, and the only thing that keeps Jack and his men safe are specialized belts that emit a signal. Meanwhile, Jack is contacted by Stotz, the leader of the mercenary group that brought the weapons to the planet and attacked Chalak's men in the tunnels. Stotz demands payment for the latest delivery, even though Chalak's men found it. Jack agrees to a meeting and returns to the holding area where he finds the Doctor examining the machinery. Peri asks Jack why he wears a mask and recoils in fright as he bursts into a fit of rage, saying that society will not accept his appearance. The Doctor asks what happened, and Jack reveals that he helped build the Spectrox refineries with Morgus. However, Morgus betrayed him and left him to die in one of the mud flows. He says that he was severely burnt and mutilated by the boiling mud, and Jack then leaves to go meet with Stotz. After he leaves, the Doctor says that he may be able to get past the android guards due to his Time Lord physiology. When the android doesn't react, he sneaks past it and deactivates it, letting Peri and Salatine escape the holding cell. He finds a signal belt and then gives it to Peri, saying that they need to go to the TARDIS to get respirators before they go in search of the bats. As they make their way through the tunnels, they are suddenly ambushed by an android who fires at Salatine as he is not wearing a belt. One of the bullets grazes the Doctor's head, knocking him out. Salatine, knowing that it won't fire on her because of the belt, uses Peri as a human shield and then destroys it with a weapon that he took when they escaped. He then drags Peri away with him. The Doctor wakes up a short while later and goes in search of them. Meanwhile, in the tunnels, Jack meets with Stotz and his men and agrees to a lower amount of Spectrox for the weapon delivery. He says that he will be back shortly with the Spectrox, and Stotz tells his men that the supply must be nearby. He leads them after Jack and saying that they will kill him after he leads them to the stash. As they make their way through the tunnels, they are attacked by a large lizard-like creature who spots the Doctor hiding nearby and goes to attack him. Part 3. Stotz's men open fire on the creature, who proceeds to kill several of them, allowing the Doctor to escape. He makes his way through the tunnels, but accidentally encounters Stotz and his remaining men being held at gunpoint by Jack and his androids, who earlier discovered his escape. Meanwhile, Salatine returns to the army base with Peri, who is now severely weakened because of the virus, and reveals Jack's subterfuge. Chalik prepares to have the android version of Salatine killed, but the real version says that it can use it to trick Jack and launch a sneak attack on his base. However, unbeknownst to them, Jack has been torturing the Doctor for information and assumes that they have returned to the army base. He says that they must get Peri back and leaves with his androids, granting Stotz's request to take the Doctor back with him to Androzani Major to meet his employer. Up in the army base, Chalik keeps up the pretense with the android Salatine, but he is unaware that it noticed Peri and the real Salatine hiding in the next room thanks to its infrared vision. Chalik notices a change in its demeanour as it informs him about the rising mud levels coming from the planet core, and Chalik orders it to prepare the barriers. After it leaves, Chalik goes into the room, whereas Peri's condition has continued to worsen. Salatine says he can try to give her palliative care long enough to help lead the way back to the Jack's base. Chalik agrees, saying that he would eventually have executed her for collaborating with Jack, but she protests her and the Doctor's innocence, saying that they were also Jack's prisoners. Salatine confirms this, but Chalik ignores her and tells Salatine to continue the treatment. They then plan the assault on Jack's base, and Salatine suggests that they make it seem completely legitimate by staging a call to Morgus, which Salatine says Jack would be notified of by communications taps that the android had placed. He says that if they give fake coordinates, they can lull Jack into a false sense of security. Chalik rejoices at this, as it will allow him to return home in triumph. Meanwhile, on Stotz's ship, the Doctor, whose condition has also been worsening, is manacled to the bridge. Stotz tells the rest of his men to leave, and he blindfolds the Doctor, saying that he must contact his employer. He turns on a vidscreen and is greeted by Morgus. He recounts everything that happened in the tunnels and says that he may know where Jack has stored the Spectrox. Morgus then notices the Doctor and orders that his blindfold be removed. He is shocked to see that he is still alive and believes that Chalik staged the execution. He demands to know who the Doctor works for, but the Doctor says that he is just an innocent bystander who got mixed up in the conflict. Morgus states his belief that the President ordered the fake execution, and he orders that Stotz maintain an orbit above the planet and wait for further instructions. He then gets another call from Chalik, who says that he is preparing to assault on the false location of the base. Morgus asks if he has told the President yet, but Chalik says that he hasn't, saying that and Morgus says that he will then inform him himself. Unbeknownst to them, the android Salatine, who was sent to recon the false location, meets with Jack, who realizes that Chalik is trying to fool him. However, he says that this will soon be his chance to retrieve Peri from the base. He successfully manages to sneak in, and he kidnaps the weakened Peri, who tries in vain to fight him off before being knocked out. Later, on Androzani Major, Morgus summons the President to his office and informs him of an assassination plot in his life. He suggests that the President cancel all his public engagements, and the President agrees. As he prepares to leave via Morgus's private elevator, the President thanks Morgus for his information, but Morgus suddenly pushes him down the empty elevator shaft. He then calls his secretary and informs her of what happened, saying that it was an accident due to a fault in the elevator system. He orders the maintenance technician to be killed, and then tells his secretary to inform the rest of the council that he will go to Androzani Minor in an attempt to broker a peace. Back on Androzani Minor, Jack returns to his base with Peri and gives her something to help with her symptoms. She asks after the Doctor, and he tells her that he was taken to Androzani Major by Stotz's men. Peri says that he could have stopped them, but he instead goes into a rant about how Morgus destroyed his life. He then says he will take comfort in her beauty and that they will be happy together. A disgusted Peri says that the army will soon be attacking the base, and that they have successfully replicated the signal belts that will prevent the androids from attacking them. Jack says that he will merely alter the frequency and they will be slaughtered. Meanwhile, the Doctor has managed to free himself from his manacles after Stotz leaves the bridge. He locks the door and attempts to pilot the ship back to Androzani Minor. Stotts returns and demands that the Doctor open the door. The Doctor says that he hasn't done a manual landing in a while and that they had better brace for impact. Stotts and the men manage to cut a hole in the door, and Stotts says he will kill the Doctor unless he turns the ship around. The Doctor defiantly says that he needs to get back so he can find a cure for Peri. Part 4. The Doctor successfully manages to land the ship, and the resulting impact caused by the landing allows him to escape when Stotts and his men are knocked to the ground. Stotts orders his men to go after him whilst he gets a call from the Morgus, who says that he is on his way to the planet. The Doctor, growing increasingly weaker, collapses to the ground as Stotts' men gain on him, but he is saved when a sudden mud flow bursts from the ground, cutting off their pursuit. Meanwhile, in the caves, Salatine leads Chalak and his men through the tunnels towards Jek's base. They are confronted by an android, but Salatine says that it won't hurt them due to the bells. However, it kills Salatine, and Chalak orders his men to open fire, destroying the android. He then orders his men to onwards and to steadily advance, destroying the androids as they go. However, the mud flow starts to grow heavier, leaving Chalak's men no way to retreat. In his base, Jek says that he must go and activate more androids and tells Peri that she will be safe while he is gone. On the surface, Stotts' men return to the ship and say they lost the Doctor. Morgus arrives and tells them to leave him and Stotts alone. He reveals his murder of the President, but states his belief that the Doctor was a government spy who may have revealed his complicity in the smuggling and prolonging of the war. He says that he intends to take his remaining fortune and escape to another planet in the system, but before he goes, he wants to take Jek's supply of stock Spectrox with him. He asks Stotts to lead him to it, offering to share with him and his men. Stotts agrees, but says they will need to be careful due to the mud flows and the fact that he doesn't know exactly where the stockpile is. He then summons his men back, and Morgus calls his secretary to arrange for his assets to be transferred. However, she reveals that she has informed the council of his treachery, and a warrant has been issued for his arrest, and all his assets have been seized. He angrily turns off the communicator and says that they can still be rich with just the Spectrox, but Stotts' men refuse to go with him. However, Stotts says that he will go, saying that he has a vendetta to settle with Jek. Before they go, Stotts kills the rest of his men and then informs Morgus that he is in charge and that they will fully split the Spectrox supply between them. Back in his base, Jek returns to rescue Peri, having used up the last of his androids. Chalak suddenly appears and grapples with Jek. Chalak pulls off his mask and screams in horror at Jek's face. Jek pushes him back into the tunnel where he is consumed by a mud flow. Jek then closes the door before going back to Peri, who also screams at his mangled face, causing Jek to scream in pain. Peri passes out, and Jek, having put back on his mask again, cradles her unconscious body. The Doctor suddenly appears, and Jek says that she is dying. The Doctor says he needs to get to the lower tunnels in order to get the cure for the disease, and tells Jek to show him the route. Before he goes, Jek gives him an oxygen canister, and then goes back to looking after Peri. The Doctor makes his way to the lower levels and successfully locates the hibernating bats. He manages to extract the antidote from the Queen Bat and makes his way back up to Jek's base. At that moment, Morgus and Stotts break into the base and demand to know where the Spectrox is. Jek flies into a rage at the sight of Morgus, and he rips off his mask and uses the momentary shock it causes them to attack them. Jek tries to strangle Morgus, but he is shot by Stotts, who in turn is killed by the returning android Salatine. Jek uses the last of his strength to kill Morgus by ramming him into a computer bank, electrocuting him. He then dies in Salatine's arms. The Doctor returns and retrieves Peri and rushes back to the TARDIS as the mud flows destroy the base. As he tries to open the door, he stumbles and spills some of the antidote. He retrieves the rest of it and quickly gets inside as the mud flows explode to the surface. He takes off and quickly gives Peri the antidote before collapsing to the floor as he enters the final stages of the disease. The antidote takes immediate effect, and Peri quickly recovers and goes to help the Doctor. She asks him for the rest of the antidote, but he says that there was only enough for one dose. Peri begs him not to die, but he says that he might regenerate, but something feels different this time. He then goes into a fugue state as visions of Tegan, Turlo, Chameleon, Nissa and Adric beg him to fight and stay alive. A vision of the Master appears, taunting him and goading him to die. The regeneration process then kicks in, and the Doctor sits up, now having a slightly older appearance with curly blonde hair. Peri cautiously asks if he is the Doctor, and he smugly asks if she was expecting someone else. When she begins to stutter her confusion, he says her repeated use of the word I makes her seem very egotistical. She manages to compose herself and asks what happened, and he says that it was change and not a moment too soon. End of the story. All right. So I'm going to quip clap my gums for a bit. So it's over to you in the trivia corner. What have you got for us this week?
Cool. So the air date of this story is the 8th of March to the 16th of March, 1984. For our writer for the story, we have Robert Holmes. Person who's seen Robert in a while. This is story 15 of 17 and a bit, written by Robert. For anyone who hasn't been paying attention or who's only just joining us, Robert has been a writer on the show since the Patrick Troughton season 6 story, The Crotons, back in 1968. So he's been writing for the show at this point for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
And although he's the most prolific writer in the classic run of the program, this was his only regeneration story out of all those 17 and a bit.
Yeah.
I love how you check in your head. I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was, not that I'm doubting you, but it's like, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You could do it as the perky bit, not as the confirmation that I can read.
Yeah, no, it's a case of, oh, yes, she's correct. Sorry, I didn't phrase it correctly.
Okay, so our director is Graham Harper. This is his first full credit on the show, though he did contribute to Warriors Gate as well. Now, a little bit behind the scenes of the Time Traveling Team podcast. Sometimes Paddy scans the trivia while we're doing the intro because usually they're on the same page. I specifically told him not to look at the trivia because I want to see his reaction when I list off the 15 or so Doctor Who stories that Graham Harper will go on to direct.
Okay.
Revelation of the Daleks, Rise of the Cybermen, The Age of Steel, Army of Ghosts, Doomsday, 42, Utopia. He contributed to Last of the Time Lords. He did Time Crash, Partners in Crime, Planet of the Ood, The Unicorn and the Wasp, Turn Left, The Stolen Earth, Journey's End, and The Waters of Mars. He is also the director of a couple of episodes of the Sarah Jane Adventures, including Whatever Happened to Sarah Jane, The Temptation of Sarah Jane Smith, and Enemy of the Bane. I am really looking forward to discussing Graham Harper as we go forward.
Yes. And it's actually a bit of personal team history. Waters of Mars is the first story you and I properly discussed when we became friends.
Yeah, I wouldn't, because I would have just gotten into it before then with Journey's End and Stolen Earth. And Whatever Happened to Sarah Jane is my favourite Sarah Jane Adventures story.
And I'll say it to you now because I can't contain myself. I'm an absolute fucking sucker for Unicorn and the Wasp.
I know you are.
Yeah.
Harper's direction was hailed by everyone involved in the production as being highly innovative. He had more free use of the camera movement than usual, and he directed from the studio floor. So usually the way Doctor Who was recorded, you'd have studio and then you'd have the directors up in like a booth. But Graham actually liked being on the studio floor, which was great for the actors. And it really contrasted with all of the directors who came before. Peter Davison, in particular, really found Harper's directing style to his liking, and he lamented that he had to wait until his last story to receive this bolder style of direction. And had this been the style all along, he probably would have stayed longer.
There's even some cinematography choices. Like there's a small bit kind of more tilted angles and like dynamic camera work. I think here that actually works really well within the story.
Yeah, it really does. But let's go on to some of our just general story notes here. So the story had the working title of Chain Reaction. There is another potential title for the story that I'll talk about in a little bit. Despite the actual title of Caves of Androzani, the Doctor notes in the first 2 minutes that they're not actually caves. It's the Harpack blowholes, which I find hilarious. Apparently, I don't know, I haven't played it. Apparently the maps of the caves shown on the screen bear a bit of a superficial resemblance to the video game Dig Dug. I've never played it. I cannot comment. The regeneration sequence, let's jump ahead for a second, features specifically recorded cameos by Matthew Waterhouse, Janet Fielding, Sarah Sutton, Mark Strickland, Gerald Flood, and Anthony Ainley. Because Matthew and Sarah had left the show in previous seasons, special contracts had to be written in order for them to come back. And there was some concerns, particularly with Sarah Sutton, because Nissa's appearance required them to pay her creator, John Byrne, royalties. And also, Sarah Sutton had chickenpox. She filmed her cameo. But this is very different, and Jonathan Turner wanted it to be a bit like Legopolis, but sort of seeing the faces that had been friends of the Doctor, but he wanted to do it better with it being specific call-outs to this Doctor rather than just generic stock footage, which I think is interesting. I think it's weird to do it 2 Doctors in a row, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
The closing credits were altered for this incoming Doctor as well. So this is Peter's last story, but his face doesn't appear in his final credits. Instead, they sort of dissolve from Colin's actual face in the last scene into him on the sort of Starscape backdrop-y type thing. And he gets the credit as the Doctor, followed by Peter Davison, which means this is the second time where Peter is credited second in a regeneration story. So he was credited second in Legopolis, and you would think that because Tom was credited first in Legopolis, that Peter would be credited first here, but no, they credited Colin and then Peter. So Peter kind of got shafted a small bit.
Yeah, just a tad.
This is the first time, and last time, we have been given an explanation for why the Doctor wears celery. I don't know why they decided to include it, but they did. Depending on how you define companions and when companions start and end, this is the first time that the Doctor has travelled without any non-human companions since, if you're counting K9, which I would, The Invisible Enemy. If you're discounting K9, it'd be Horror of Fang Rock. You could also maybe do Keeper of Traken if you didn't include Nyssa. So it depends on how you classify Nyssa and Keeper of Traken and how you classify K9 in general. But potentially this has been the first time since 1977 that we've had we haven't had a non-human companion. That's what I want to spread it. This is a story that's filled with a lot of death. Sometimes quite brutal. The only 2 characters who do not die for a fact, and we're including regeneration as death in this just for the sake of coming, are Peri and Timon, which are also the only 2 female characters. All the men are dead.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Timon is Morgus' secretary.
Yes. All the men are dead. Now, it's also questionable whether androids were alive to begin with, but all the men are dead.
These are more robotic servitors than they are kind of free-thinking androids.
With except for Celatine, like Android Celatine. Yeah. There was a lot of on-screen mishaps with this story as well, to the point where Peter Davison joked that they were actually trying to kill him. 2 of these are, one was during a scene where Sharazek backhands the Doctor, which I was massively taken aback by. I don't know about you. Because of the mask, Christopher Gale's vision was impaired, so he did actually hit Peter, as opposed to just face hitting him.
So he only has vision in one eye because on the mask, the left eye is prosthetic. So he would only have vision on one side.
Yeah. And then the other time was when the Doctor's when the Doctor is carrying Peri back into the TARDIS at the end of the story, there's a mudburst nearby that he flinches at. The explosion was triggered prematurely, and sand went up into Peter Davison's eyes and caused him to recoil in pain. He really was not having the best time.
Yup.
There's also a few other things that are notable with the story. It's one of those stories where the eventual outcome negates the importance of the plot, meaning things are worse because the Doctor is there. Had he not been there, things probably would have been better. And I'm sure we'll discuss that a bit more in the character discussion piece. This is a story, though, that is very highly regarded. Was chosen by fans to represent the Peter Davison era during the rebroadcast of Doctor Who at 40. Peter Davison said it's his favourite serial. Nicola Bryant claimed it was her favourite. Jonathan Turner said it was definitely one of the highlights of his tenure. Everyone really seems to enjoy it. Like I said, Peter said that like his performance during this entire story was much better than he'd been doing all along, and had he been given this direction all along, he probably would have stayed longer. What he did say, though, was that his regeneration was overshadowed by the obvious visibility of Nicola Bryant's cleavage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so there's one bit of trivia that Paddy kind of knew before we went into this, which is Morgus has this weird tendency to look directly into camera and break the fourth wall as he sort of seems to speak out his inner thoughts. It's really random and kind of weird. Apparently, this came from John Normington misunderstanding the stage directions. However, everyone kind of liked that sort of brought this sort of Shakespearean theatrical feel to it, and so they decided to leave it. I'm like, okay, it was a choice. It was a choice to leave it in.
Mm-hmm. I have thoughts on it. I have thoughts.
Yeah. I'm going to discuss a couple of potential castings here, because I think one of which is just really interesting, and the other one I have a question about. So,
okay,
the role of Sharaz Jek, sorry, Sharaz Jek. Considered for the role were Tim Curry, David Bowie, Mick Jagger. They were all offered the role. And also under consideration was Derek Jacobi and John Hurt. Out of these 5 people, David Bowie is the only one whose refusal has a known explanation, as according to his biographer, the scheduled taping dates would have conflicted with his Serious Moonlight tour.
I would have been happy with all of them except Mick Jagger, because I think Bowie's actually a very good actor.
Yeah. Graham Harper had hoped to bring Michael Craze back to play Krelper. But this was vetoed by Jonathan Turner, because Jonathan Turner felt that the casting of Jacqueline Hill in Meglos hadn't really worked out. I don't agree, but whatever. I did mention that there was another title for this story. So this story had a different title in Jonathan Turner's production board. Because he was convinced that someone in the production office was leaking information about upcoming stories, this story was listed on his planning board as The Doctor's Wife. And so the fan press reported that Robert Holmes was writing a serial called The Doctor's Wife. We're going to get to the end here now. So we've Colin coming into the role. Peter's spare costume didn't fit Colin, so he gave his performance with his trousers undone, which I just find funny. Okay, let's jump into our cast. So,
but before you do that, I actually have one more trivia thing, and I actually want to get your thoughts on this. So, according to some fan polls, now the ones I can't think of what they are, but they're not like the Radio Times or anything like that. The part 3 cliffhanger, where the Doctor was piloting the ship back to the planet, has been cited on certain fan polls as the best cliffhanger of the classic era.
I'm not sure I'd agree. I don't 100% disagree. I think it's down to personal preference. It wouldn't be my favourite or the most suspenseful for me personally. I think Sarah Jane dropping off giant scaffolding in Genesis of the Daleks.
I would have gone with Doctor staggering from the room with the Daleks strangling him in Genesis of the Daleks.
That one too. There's a couple of others, but I mean, it was a good cliffhanger. Like as cliffhangers go, it was very good. But I think that's a lot of that is personal.
Yeah.
Personal preference.
But like the real answer is the best cliffhanger of all time was where the TARDIS is actually precariously balancing on a cliff at the end of the story. Cool.
Okay, let's do our cast super quick. So as Sharazek, I'm going to keep calling him Sharazek because it's just the way my mouth forms those two words. We have, as I mentioned, Christopher Gable. This is the only Doctor Who acting credit for Christopher. His non-Who credits include Women in Love, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, The Devil's Crown, A Simple Man, and The Rainbow. Christopher passed away in 1998. As Morgus, we have John Normington, as I have mentioned. As first of two acting credits for John, we'll see him again in The Happiness Patrol. He did also appear in the Torchwood story Ghost Machine, and I only realised that when I looked it up who he was in that episode. He was really good in that episode. His non-Who credits include Private Function, Rollerball, Atonement, and David Copperfield, the one with Daniel Radcliffe prior to Harry Potter. John passed away in 2007. Salatine is played by Robert Glenister. This is the first of two on-screen Doctor Who credits for Robert. We will see him again way, way far in the future in the 13th Doctor story, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. He has also done some work for Big Finish, so a couple of off-screen Doctor Who work, as it were. His non-Who credits include Only Fools and Horses, Sink or Swim, A Touch of Frost, and Law and Order UK.
And he would probably be best known for a recurring role in The Hustle. Yeah, very good show.
As Stotts, we have Maurice Roves. This is the only Doctor Who acting credit for Maurice. However, his non-Who credits include The Last of the Mohicans, Judge Dredd, and he was also in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Chase, where he played the Romulan captain.
He actually does have another Doctor Who connection. He played Peter Capaldi's father in an episode of the show Skins.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
He sadly passed away in 2020. Lastly, as Chellick, we have Martin Cochrane, only Doctor Who acting credit for Martin. His non-Who credits include Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, Patriot Games, and Sutherland's Law. Finally, as the Doctor, we have Colin Baker. We will discuss Colin more when we talk about his first full story.
Mm-hmm.
Thus endeth the trivia. Okay, we have story recap done, trivia done. Now we're on to our character discussion. For those of you who are not aware, in every episode we discuss the Doctor, the companions, which in this case is just Peri.
Yep.
The prominent characters. Now for prominent characters, I had Salatine and Chellick.
Yes, same here.
And then we have the villains of Sharazek,
Mm-hmm.
Traun Morgus, or just Morgus.
Mm.
And then I kind of put Stotts in there as well. Like, he's more of a minion, really, but I would put him in there as well.
So, I would have put Stotts in anyway, but also, I am a massive fanboy for Maurice Roves. So, like, I love everything that he's in, and I love watching him in it. So, I was like,
I assumed you would be. When I saw what else he was in, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I love that man in anything I've seen him in.
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of Robert Glenister as well as Salatine, but we'll talk about that more as we go on.
Yeah. So, the Doctor comes first.
Mm-hmm.
Paddy goes first because he did the socials readout, and that's the only way we can track who actually goes first. So, Paddy, what were your thoughts on the Doctor in his final story in this regeneration?
If you're going to go out, I'm glad that you're going out well. I agree with Peter. I think that this was probably one of his stronger stories, possibly his strongest story. I don't know. I'll have to check my notes for the rambling. But it's no secret to anyone that's been listening is that we're not too hot on this particular run of the show. Had he been given material like this, possibly very different conversations to be had throughout all those stories. I definitely agree with him that this would have been more suitable material for him. What I like about him most in this story is that his motivation isn't trying to stop the villain or trying to stop the war. It's basically just trying to save Peri. It's trying to keep her safe, trying to get her away and give her the antidote. And I think it's interesting as well that for nearly the entirety of the story, we see him on essentially the back foot. Because the Doctor and Peri are very much background players to this whole thing. They're not actively involved in trying to prevent anything that's happening. And it's interesting to see him on the back foot because, like, he's keeping up his like very flippant mannerisms, but like, getting bitch slapped by Shara's Jack. And but even his encounters with like Chalak or even talking to Morgus is like he's just so tired and done with them because he just wants to focus on saving Peri. And yeah, so like I did like him in this. I really did. But also I have to say just a small bit about the Sixth Doctor because this is the first time that a incoming Doctor has had a chance to have dialogue on screen immediately post generation. I'm like, no, we usually get the current or the new incoming Doctor dissing his previous appearance or personality or whatever. It's like, oh my god, like he goes pretty much hard on this one because it's like it's about time change has happened. I also got kind of Hartnell vibes from him a small bit. Let's see how that pays off down the line. But in relation to the Fifth Doctor, I thought strong story, good outing for him. Sad we didn't get more of this.
So I agree with you for the most part. Again, it's absolutely no secret that I have not particularly enjoyed Peter Davison's run on the show. Mm-hmm. We talked about that a lot in our end of year rambling. Mm-hmm. I agree that this was probably Peter's best performance. Mm-hmm. And I 100%, no offense to Peter, chalk that up to the writing and the directing. Mm-hmm. I think particularly in the second half, so after he gets separated from Peri when Salatine takes Peri and the Doctor's knocked out, I fully agree with you that his whole purpose from then on out is just to save Peri. Mm-hmm. I was concerned at the beginning because his dynamic with her at the start was very much like his dynamic with Tegan, which is kind of antagonistic and not overly friendly. And I was disappointed in him with their first interactions with Sharazek because, like, we'll talk more about this when we get to Peri and we get to Sharazek later on. Sharazek is being the creepiest, pervious motherfucker ever. Mm-hmm. And the Doctor, while clearly unhappy about it, mostly just stands there.
Yeah.
And lets him say it. Now, he does sort of, I think it was like 2 or 3 occasions, he did sort of step up to try and distract him from talking to Peri. But, like, that's pretty much it, you know. And I sort of would have expected, I would have hoped that he would have stood up for her more. I mean, this is the first time really that this Doctor has encountered someone who is so pervy on the person that he's shopping with. And so I would have hoped that he would have been a bit more.
Wait, I would actually disagree with that. I would say that Mariner in Enlightenment was just as pervy as Jack is, but he clearly didn't learn any lessons from that for this.
Okay. I agree on Mariner. Mariner was a different type of pervy, though.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to be smooth and suave and just wasn't taking no for an answer. This guy is stroking her face and touch it. No.
Yeah.
All kinds of no. The other thing, which actually really took me by surprise, and maybe it shouldn't because the Doctor is still fallible, is the fact that the Doctor gave up Salatine. So when the Doctor basically said, well, Salatine has escaped to Shara's check when the androids are sort of pulling on his arms.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you could have told them anything. But you basically just said the guy you thought was a prisoner actually isn't your prisoner anymore. Which sort of ties into what I was saying earlier, that the story would have been better for the people involved had the Doctor not been there at all.
Mm.
Because if the Doctor hadn't said that, then Shara's Jack wouldn't have known for certain that Salatine had escaped. And therefore, their plan to take him out may have actually worked. Because he wouldn't have known that the android had been replaced or whatever.
Mm.
So I didn't expect him to give him up like that. For the rest of the story, I completely agree with you, though, in the sense that, like, he's not a main driver. He has some good moments. And I love the fact that, like, I think he sort of realised, as soon as he sort of put the pieces together of, they're going after them and they're going after them, and okay, now I'm tied up in the ship, and fuck it, it's that guy again. Okay, cool. And he's just like, no, I've nothing to do with any of you. I have my focal point, which is getting Peri, which is fine. In terms of the Sixth Doctor, I'm curious to see what that's going to be like. Again, I've seen none of Colin. Like, this is literally the first of Colin I've seen. So I'm kind of curious because he's coming off, like, I do see a little bit of impishness,
Mm-hmm.
like with Bill, but also there's a little bit of antagonism towards Peri,
Mm-hmm.
where he's like, you said I 3 times in one sentence. That sounds really narcissistic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna wait and see.
Like, as I said, like, it's very. It's like the two dynamics of Hartnell of the unearthly child version, and then the post rescue version.
Yeah. There's one other thing that I found interesting at the start of the story as I was watching it, and then when I saw that it was Bob Holmes that had written it, I was like, okay. And then it was sort of solidified by a point I didn't mention in trivia that I was leaving until now. I want you to close your eyes, imagine that exact same story, but imagine Tom Baker instead of Peter Davison.
I've done that. I've done that.
So did Robert Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wrote the Doctor as the 4th Doctor, not as the 5th Doctor.
Mm. Yep, I could easily see Hinchcliffe era Tom doing this.
Which is very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
This is not who this Doctor has been up until now. So for me, I think it was a good performance. I think it was probably one of Peter's best performances.
Mm-hmm.
Does this mean I now love the 5th Doctor? No. For me, it's a little bit too little too late, to be honest. And I kind of agree with the 6th Doctor that change couldn't have come at a better time. But I am happy for Peter that the story he's going out on, he was able to deliver a really good performance. And it was really interesting for him as the Doctor. I'm glad that he got that ending to his story and that it wasn't just a poof, like, it wasn't a Planet of Fire, or it wasn't one of the other ones that we've had recently.
It's very true about this show that a beloved Doctor can have some pretty bad stories, be it the quality or the actual characterization of the Doctor, and then there's Doctors that aren't too high on the list or lowest on the list can turn out a great story or a great performance. So.
Yeah. So let's move on to Peri. Poor Peri.
To Julian Brown.
Yes, what are your thoughts on Peri this time around?
So, first of all, that accent is cracking badly. Like, there's an awful lot of times where, like, the, received pronunciation, it comes out, and I'm like, it's a funny anecdote, but I really wished that she hadn't done it. But anyway, accent aside, hats off to Nicola here. Honestly, I have to say hats off to her. I think this is a solid performance from her. And she really sells the stakes of someone that doesn't deserve to die, dying in a very horrible manner. I will absolutely say that her performance in that front is great. Now, she's very damsel in distress in this episode, which is a step back from which is a step back in terms of the agency and the plot driving that we saw in the previous story. I think that's okay here, though, because she now has become the beating emotional heart of this story. Everything you're feeling for Peri. You're feeling the Doctor's desire. Like, usually they say, like, oh, the companion is like, you're meant to empathize with the companion in terms of the gateway into the show. And you're actually they've done that really well here, because as a fan, you're driving the Doctor to get back to her. You're going, come on, you've got to get back to save her. You've got to do that. And Jack's motivation surrounding her, I agree. I will talk more about it, creepy as fuck. But there's a bit where he's carrying her around in his arms, very kind of Quasimodo, Phantom of the Opera type thing. And he's like, she's dying. And he says it in a very sorrowful manner. And then that audio is echoed when, like, the Doctor is going down into the tunnels, and he just hears that in his head. I'm like, please save Peri. So that is entirely down to the combination of Bob Holmes writing well and Nicola performing it well. So I think we had the action and agency performance last week. Now we've got the emotional aspect of a companion in peril this week. So another strong showing for Peri, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, and we've discussed this before, the sort of damsel in distress story is not always a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
There are times where it's horrendous.
Yeah.
But it's not always a bad one. And I think I agree with you. I think last episode, or the last story we talked about, obviously, Planet of Fire, I think Peri, we got to see a lot of her bravery and agency, but we didn't really get to emotionally connect with her that much. Whereas here we get to see that emotional connection. I love the fact that, like, obviously the sort of red cloak death thing was an android and not actually Peri. But I would assume the android technology is similar to the replacement technology we've seen in previous stories, where, like, it has done some sort of brain scan. Mm-hmm. So the sort of, like, do you have any last words? And android Peri basically being like, no, because this is fucking ridiculous. I think the real Peri would have had that same reaction. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that by where it's going up until there. I love as well the fact that, like, even though she's dying for pretty much the entire duration of the story, not that she knows at the beginning, she doesn't really do a whole lot of woe is me.
No.
She is very much confused and being moved from pillar to post. But all she's doing is just saying, we didn't do anything wrong. We were prisoners. We didn't do anything. And stuff like that. So I think for a Peri plot driving episode, she doesn't really drive a lot of plot. For a Peri emotion driving episode, yes, 110%. And like you said, like, the fact is, like, I must save Peri, I must save Peri, I must save Peri, I must get back to Peri. It's good, and it says a lot about Peri as a character, that even though this is only her second story, we see the Doctor care a lot more about Peri than he did about fucking anyone else for the last 4 seasons. 3 seasons or whatever. So I thought that was really good. And it's going to be interesting to do that comparison with how she is with the next Doctor, because she doesn't know this Doctor very well. She doesn't know Five very long. We see that he obviously wants to protect her, and now he's changed. So I'm very curious to see what that change will be like. And I will give her kudos in some regard to the fact that she put up with Jack quite admirably.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think, we talked about this a lot when we talked about Tegan and Tegan's situation with Mariner, as you mentioned earlier. When you're in that situation, you can scream and give out and try and push yourself away and stuff like that. Or you can choose to not engage. And you can put up that barrier around yourself. And that's the version that Peri went with. She didn't go, no, don't touch me. Da, 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 da. Every time he was near her, she just took a deep breath and was like, don't engage. Don't give him the benefit of a reaction. Do you know? Bar the one occasion where she sort of turned to the doctor and nearly cried, which I think was justifiable in that case. So I'm quite liking Peri. I will say the accent has got to go. I was so hoping they'd do a dodo on it and just randomly change her accent. I'm kind of subtly still hoping that'll happen either next story or next season because it's actually fucking painful.
I'm going to burst that bubble from you now. If memory serves correctly, I'm going to have to burst that bubble for you now. One thing though, the way you said like that, Bob Holmes clearly wrote this for the Fourth Doctor. Can you imagine if he had replaced Peri with Leela in this story?
That would have been very sick because I think you can sort of imagine. You can imagine this as a Tom and Sarah Jane story.
Oh yeah,
110%.
Absolutely.
I can imagine it very easily as a Tom and Romana 1 story. I don't really see it as a Tom Romana 2 story. I think Tom and Leela, it would have been a very different. Because Leela's reaction would have been very, very different.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of continuity of companion as character, if that makes sense. I think you could very easily swap these two out and put Tom and Sarah in, or put Tom and Romana 1 in. And the story would work just as well, which is a good thing for us because we liked those dynamics.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing for Peter, that this isn't like, oh, well, this is Peter's opus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's nice that it has all of the elements of things that you and I like. You know, put a big asterisk on that. I'll come back to in a second, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Also, you raised an interesting point there that she's not very woe is me. And I actually was just thinking there, I think she's more woe is me at the concept of like the execution. But when she finds out that she has this horrible disease, I think she has a lot more faith in the doctor to be able to rescue her from that. Or like that they might be able to get out of it. So I think she was woe is me, but in the weirder situation, which is the firing squad one.
So I think the woe is me with the firing squad, I think it's not as bad as we've seen some other people.
No.
It's fully justifiable.
Yeah.
And I think the difference between that and you're dying of a disease is, one, the whole firing squad thing is not her fault.
No.
She didn't do anything wrong. Whereas, you know, with the disease thing, she did. She stepped in the fucking thing and,
yeah,
you know, kind of her own doing. But also, the firing squad is very short term. It's very immediate, and there's nothing they can do. But she heard mention of a cure for this thing.
Yeah.
And there is time. And things can happen and things can change. So don't lose hope. If anything, Joe, it actually...
Yeah.
It's kind of ironically. It's kind of a Braveheart Peri kind of thing.
Yeah. And like, the thing is like, yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I'm not even saying like that she's overtly woe is me, but I think that's the most woe is me moment she has in the story.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Cool. Okay, let's move on to our prominent characters. So we have Salatine and Chelak. Which of those would you like to discuss first?
Saltine first, please. Because that's all I could think of was Saltine.
All I could think was Saladin from fucking back in Bill Hartnell.
So the first of two supporting actors that I really like in other things. He plays, I think, one of my favorite characters in Hustle. But anyway, I actually know I enjoyed Salatine in this show, this story, because he's very capable. Like, he's a very competent officer. And he's also a slight bit arrogant, which is, it kind of reminds me of Salamar from Planet of Evil. Kind of has that air about him. And I think there's like the level of arrogance that, and this is kind of more a reflection on Chelak, which we'll talk to when he becomes a talking point, is that if the campaign had been a success, and if he had survived, I'd say that he would have been gunning for Chelak's position. I think he is very competent at his job. I think there's a reason. Like, I think there's a reason why the android version of him fit in so seamlessly, because he was able to properly replicate the intelligence and like the forethoughtness of. I mean, like, and I'll talk about it a bit more when we come into Chelak's thing. Is like that all the major strategic points that are made from the federal forces are made from suggestions that Salatine makes rather than Chelak makes. So that's why I'm saying I think he would have been gunning for that spot, or at least maybe kind of inverting, like going, can I also be, promotion, please, general, please. As for Robert's performance as the android version, Christ, he's fucking unnerving. Like, it's really, really creepy how cold and dead his eyes get when he's the android version. And I did like the ending sequence where he returns and Jack dies in his arms. And he actually just stands perfectly stock still as he collapses into his arms, as if he has completely powered down like a store mannequin. So, very good performance from Robert here, I think. Very interesting character.
I'd agree. I think, I mean, first off, I completely agree with you on the performance. One of the things I love about his performance actually is the fact that it's very easy to tell the android from the person. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in the fact that, like, how he holds himself for these subtle differences.
Mm-hmm.
That as someone who's in on it is easy to tell once you've
Yeah.
seen them. But obviously for someone like Chelak or for the other people in the ranks, it's harder to tell because you don't see them back to back like we do. Do you know what I mean? Where we see them one scene versus the other. One thing I found that struck me with Salatine in the android forms when we first meet him, when we don't know he's an android, is how young he is.
Mm-hmm.
He is very young, and I sort of couldn't help but, and I may talk about this more later on, but I couldn't help but compare him to the younger officers we see in like the first two episodes of Genesis of the Daleks, particularly in the first episode of Genesis of the Daleks, where you've got young men being brought up through the ranks quickly. Now, obviously, in this story, it's explained, for all we know, Salatine could be 60 years old, right? But he looks very young. So for him to be a major and to be the more strategically minded, at first I was like, oh wow, he's really young. Then I'm like, but is he though?
Like, I was actually just looking up there. He was 24 when this came out. Like, he had just turned 24 when this was aired.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think Salatine, the person, the man, so not the android, I think is a really complex character in a way because he was held captive for 6 months or something. He was there for ages. And I don't know if the way he is with the Doctor and Peri is because he's sort of losing his humanity being around Jack and these androids all the time. Or if that's just the way he is, if he's just a bit of a hard nose, he's just a bit of a whatever. But certainly interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Because at one point you're sort of waiting for him to take pity on Peri and to try to support her or whatever. And he really fucking doesn't.
Yo.
She is a means to an end as far as he's concerned.
He uses her as a human shield.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I think he's really interesting, and I totally agree with you in the sense that I don't think he's gunning for Chelak's job,
Mm-hmm.
because I think the two of them get along really well together.
Hmm.
But I think the point would come probably in, like, relatively speaking, like a year or so, where, I mean, he has already outgrown him.
Oh yeah.
So I don't think he would have remained his subordinate for much longer, and he probably would have gone off and had his own command.
Yeah.
And within 5 years, he would have been the 5-star general to Chelak's 1-star, and
Yeah.
ultimately been his boss. Because he seems to hold great respect for Chelak. The two of them seem to have a really good dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
But he is definitely the brains of the operation. Up like
Oh,
110%.
massively. And just on the subject of his acting as well, that death scene, very good. Like he really threw himself into that.
His reaction. Okay, so for people who haven't seen it, he gets shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Double tap. And the way he does it, his body moves once and then moves again as the other shot hits, as opposed to, no offense, pretty much everyone else who just either does the sort of like overly dramatic thing, or does like the half spin fall to the floor. He actually does the whole blowback twice.
Yeah.
Really well.
Like
and then he just drops. Like,
yeah.
it's really well done. It's very
Be-
weird to say that in Doctor Who, but like it's a really good reaction.
Because like the weapons aren't lasers, right? Like that, they're actually like standard projectile weapons. So yeah, like the impacts he does, fantastic, really, really well done. So moving on to Chelak.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I think you screamed worse than Perry did when you saw Sheriff Jack's face. Like very, very high pitched. But I read a lot of historical fiction, like kind of Peninsular War, Napoleonic War era, like early Roman Empire type stuff. And Chelak is really reminiscent of the characters, sort of be they like Roman generals or higher ranking British officers that buy their promotions. That, like, they have this lip service level of understanding of military tactics, and they think that, like, they have these high ranks, so therefore they just like, yeah, I'm in charge for a reason. Like, it's not the fact that I was politically appointed or paid money for, or whatever the case may be. And I say that because of the fact, and I echoed it for Salatine's thing, is that at no point does he actually come up with any of the strategy in this thing. It's all suggested to him via the android version of Salatine, who's just doing it for delaying tactics, or the actual version of Salatine. Like, and you'd be kind of wondering like that. Yeah, okay, the campaign has dragged on for, yeah, I think it's about 6 or 8 months now at this stage that the campaign has dragged on for. And the question is in my head is like, how much longer would it have dragged on for if Salatine hadn't been there beforehand? Like, would they have actually captured the refinery? Would they have made the advances that they did? And like his thing of like, oh, if I get Sheriff Jack, I can parade him through the streets and I can be the one to do this. And it's like, I don't know exactly. Very little is touched upon in this society, other than the fact that we know that a conglomerate has pretty much more power than the actual ruling council. But I don't know if he bought his way into his position, or if the way that he gained his rank is very different than. Basically what I'm saying is I don't know if he got this position on merit. And I think that once real Salatine dies in the assault, he's pretty much charged at the Light Brigade, charged for the guns. Will overwhelm them in some way, shape, or form. To the extent of that, when he finally gets to Jack's base, he's the last of his men still alive.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of disagree with you.
Okay.
So, first thing I will say in defense of Chelak, from what I've gathered from the whole idea of, so pseudo Dune reference of the spice must flow type thing. Their obsession with the fucking
Spectrox.
Spectrox or whatever. This is a society where not necessarily the beauty is held above all else, but youth is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been a very long time since he's seen any sort of experience like what Jack's face actually looks like. So I'll give him a little bit of leeway.
Okay.
But I kind of disagree with you on the whole, he clearly must have bought his commission type of thing, because Chellick seems very well respected by his men. Real Salatine, they're, like I said, they seem like a very good duo together.
Mm-hmm.
I think Chellick's problem is this has been going on for 6 months. Now, what we see of Android Salatine is Android Salatine giving all of the answers. We should do this. I've already done that. He might have done fuck all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Chellick is saying, like, say, like, oh, go close off the yellow mine or something. He's already done that. I was like, but have you though? Like, we don't know. We can't trust what Salatine is saying as being things that he's actually done. Versus Chellick clearly saying, this is what I want to have done. But it seems like he looks superfluous because Salatine is claiming he's already done it. But Salatine is an unreliable character. He's an unreliable narrator. So we don't know if he actually did fuck all of what Chellick is asking for. But like, if you think about it, Chellick has been at this for, say, 8 months. And in the last 6 months, every time he has mentioned something to Salatine, Jack knows instantly. So I think Chellick is just worn down by the fact that every stratagem he came up with was immediately defendable against. He could not gain any traction because he was playing with see-through cards and he didn't fucking know it. And on top of that, you have Morgus on the other side giving him fucking shit for not getting rid of Jack, when Morgus was also sending in guys to give Jack weapons. So Chellick is sort of being caught in this awkward position where he was never going to win, ever. Do you know? And I think when you deal with that for 6 months, when you come up with your best ideas and literally the minute they're out of your mouth, your enemy already knows them, so they always fail. And they've got this fucking asshole calling you every now and again saying that you're a fucking disgrace, so why haven't you beaten this yet? Unbeknownst to you, he's the reason why you haven't fucking beaten it yet, because he's playing this weird stupid game. I'm like, I think he's just burnt out. And do I think that he was ever the strongest, highest strategic mind? No, I don't. But I think he was competent. I think he earned his rank, personally. But you asked the question, like, oh, would they ever have taken the refiner? How could he take the refinery with Android Salatine right there? He could never do anything with Salatine there.
I think they established that they took the refinery before the Salatines were swapped.
Yeah, but as in, like, we don't know how much Chellick contributed to that. But in terms of, like, would they ever, like, what you said, like, oh, if if the story hadn't gone the way it had gone, would Chellick ever have won? No, he was never going to. It was impossible for him to win, because any idea he came up with, Jack immediately knew because Salatine told him.
Actually, I overlooked that part, I'll admit.
It's a horrible uphill battle, and the whole thing at the end, the bit that actually really got to me at the end with Chellick was that when human Salatine dies, Chellick is clearly broken. He realizes that this plan isn't going to work. He's led his men into an absolute massacre. But what is the alternative? He can't turn back now. All he can do is, and because, I mean, his sort of charge of the Light Brigade did work at a very high cost. But you can watch it when Jack is watching the monitor. He's like, androids 4, 5, and 6 pull back. And then you see the lights of 5 and 6. He's like, android 4. And it's like, no, Chellick is plowing fucking through. Mostly by himself. With a disc that no longer makes the androids stop their shooting to kill. And he's still fucking going. I think a lot of that is because these fuckers kidnapped his friends for 6 months and then fucking killed him. But he's like, fuck you. So I actually quite like him. I don't think he's the strongest military mind we've ever seen. I think Salatine would have outstripped him very quickly.
Yeah.
I suppose the difference between him and, say, a Simerson or something from, say, Sharp, which is the comparison that we always give, is Chellick cares. And he is respected.
Yeah. No, I think maybe now that I'm thinking about now there isn't the points, I think probably what my opinion is mainly coming from is that when real Salatine comes in and gives the here's what we do, here's what we do, here's what we do side of things, I was going, that was probably compounding the previous fact that like it will always seem to be the quote unquote Salatine, real Salatine at the time. But the Android one seemed to be giving all the directives, and then you have real Salatine actually come back and continue that trend. That's where I'm probably pulling this from.
Whereas, if you think about it, real Salatine has months of knowledge that Chellick does not have. So it takes a very good and comfortable leader to say, you know more about me. You know more than me in this situation.
Yeah, I
you take a point.
Yeah, no, like I think I've unfairly maligned him now. Like now that you're raising those points, yeah. So I'll put up my hand and kind of say that I've unfairly maligned that character. I will say though that I think that Salatine is the stronger, as I said, the stronger strategic mind of the two. But though he's definitely not a Simerson, but like that's why I was saying like he would be more in line with maybe like those old Roman generals that were actually. They kind of got there more so on political appointment than actually buying their way in, but so on and so forth. But yeah. But yeah, no, interesting kind of viewpoint. And yeah, I think I've unfairly maligned them to an extent, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our villains. So we have Stotts, Morgus, and Jack. Which order would you like to do those in?
I think the order you called out, so Stotts, Morgus, and Jack.
Cool. So what are your thoughts on Stotts?
Okay, so again, fanboy moment for Maurice Rose. Loved him always, ever since I saw him in Last of the Mohicans when I was a schmally. Very talented actor. But he reminds me so much of Lighten from Resurrection of the Daleks, in the sense of like he is this cold-hearted, sadistic, come at me nature kind of killer. He's a completely vicious bastard, like multiple times throughout the story, and I didn't include it because it would have just eaten up more time, for the summary and things like that. But there's a couple of different instances when men in his group kind of challenge him, not so much challenge his authority, but like, we're kind of getting fucking sick of this type thing, and he threatens to give. He pulls a knife on one guy and threatens to give him a gas pellet that would blow up his head. He threatens to abandon him in front of the androids type thing. And then the scene where him and Morgus leave and he holds his gun on them as if to kind of say don't think about shooting me in the back, and then he walks away. Then comes back 5 seconds later and just very casually shoots them all. And all their deaths are off screen, but it's just the casual way that he walks down and does it. It just reminds me very much of Leighton. And he's very representative of those private military contractors, kind of Blackwatch or Blackwater or whatever the hell they are. Guys that are essentially just modern day mercenary companies. And as I said, great actor, playing him very, very well. And to kind of add to comments about, Robert Glenster's, like, how Salatine dies. The scene where he shoots Jack and then the android Salatine comes up and shoots him in the back. Like, again, the surprise kind of lurching forward. And yeah, he does a twirl fall down, but it's like the initial lurch surprise of being shot in the back is really well done. And as I said, I think he's kind of charismatic in his cold-hearted viciousness. So he's an intriguing watch. And then when, Morgus has been, yeah, all your assets have been seized, all your thing, whatever. Like, he's like, cool, I'm still helping you, but there's none of this 4 parts for you, 4 parts for you, 1 part for me bullshit. It's down the middle. And you can pretty much guarantee that once he had all the Spectrox back in the ship, he probably would have shot Morgus.
Yeah, 100%. Like,
yeah.
The thing I found interesting about Stotts is I liked every scene he was in. I think the actor was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good. But because he comes across, in the beginning, like in the first episode or so, he comes across quite charismatic.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know, like, these guys look like freedom fighters or something. We don't know what the situation is. And you're kind of anticipating him becoming maybe sort of Han Solo-esque, sort of, he was in it for the money, but now like he's sort of realizing that, oh no, we're helping Jack and Jack is doing this or whatever. But when you get to the end and you realize he knew he was working for Morgus all along, and he knew that he was giving arms to Jack all along. He knew that those two, that Jack thought he was fighting, he knew everything. And he's just there for the cash, baby. He couldn't give a singular thundering fuck about anybody. And, that charisma, it remains, but like you said, it remains in a sort of cold fashion. You would not want to sleep with your back to him at any point.
No.
I think your man, Krelper, or whatever the fuck his name is.
Yeah, Krelper.
That guy had a fucking target on his back the minute he spoke up.
Yeah.
The minute he spoke out, that fucker would never make it back to Major. Ever. And like the scene where like, Stotts is like so sleepy on his bag or whatever, and then he has like Krelper's like, oh, this is ridiculous. And the fact that he just leaps up, pushes him over the edge of the fucking cliff or whatever. And like so where he's threatening to put this pellet in his mouth, and you're just like, holy shit. For, I think, in terms of a villain in Doctor Who, most of our villains, even some of our great villains, are quite over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we'll get to that a bit, I think, when we talk about Morgus and Jack, right? But Stotts is a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
He isn't a villain in the sense of muhahahaha, like twirling mustache, whatever. He is a guy who will stab you in the back, who'll steal your shit, he'll fuck you up. He's just a bad person.
Like,
he has zero redeeming qualities whatsoever.
Comparisons coming into my head are like Saucheria from the Romans, the slave trader. As I said, Lyton from Resurrection of the Daleks. And because you say he's not a mustache twirling villain, but there's like that slight charisma, but also intimidating nature. The war lord or the war master from like Philip Maddock, the man who acts scary with his teeth. So yeah, like definitely a very memorable supporting villain.
Yeah, I think those villains in Doctor Who are the ones that sort of are actually the scary ones. Do you know?
You get very uneasy whenever they're on screen because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And even like you compared him to Lyton, I think he's actually worse than Lyton. Lyton still had a little bit of the sort of, comedy is the wrong way to put it, but you know what I mean. He had a little bit of the muhaha to him. Stotts doesn't at all.
Yeah.
Ever. And in Doctor Who, that's actually really refreshing.
Yeah.
Yeah. particularly when you compare him to our two others. So then we
Yes.
have Morgus, or
Mm.
Trial Morgus. Mr. Let's break the fourth wall and have a weird Shakespearean moment. What are your thoughts on Morgus?
Cool. He looks like a Cardassian, and it's very distracting. His clothing style is very reminiscent of a Cardassian from Star Trek. Plus, he's got like as well the hairstyle, which is like that kind of massive forehead, but also very kind of like late Ming Dynasty ponytail that Chinese Imperial Guards would have. I think as a character, he still it's a character that resonates to this day, because we see in certain countries where political viewpoints or political agendas are kind of driven by business interests, and they're the ones like the president wasn't a strong enough character or a big enough character to have in the character discussion, but his scenes with Morgus I thought were very engaging to watch. Whereas the president's like kind of going, oh, well, of course, like he's talking about, like Morgan says, we can't end the war. It's our patriotic duty. He goes, well, the patriotism of a businessman is very different to the patriotism of a politician, because you just have to look at the balance sheet. I have to take a look at the way the public is. Like I have to that's my checks and balances type thing. And then he was talking about the unemployment is rates are skyrocketing, and there's vocal support to stop the war, but there's also kind of vocal support for like why don't we join Jack? It's like, oh well, throw them into labor camps so they can work for us. It's like, well, no, technically they can work for you. So like you're closing down factories, which is causing unemployment, and then you're getting free labor from people that you're advising us to in prison. And like he's just basically as heavily as he can say it without actually saying you're a war profiteer. But because you hold the quote unquote spices life, I have to fucking let you have your moment, So I think as a character, those themes are great to see. Like it was a very engaging piece. And it's a trope in sci-fi, absolutely, because it's true. Like it's there for a reason, It's like a lot of science fiction. They put stuff in the future, but they're talking about stuff that's happening right now, and it's still rated like in 2025. It's still happening, so therefore this part still resonates. I think he's at his most engaging when he's on Androzani Major in the political sphere. Once he comes to Minor, and once he teams up with Stotts, I think he actually Stotts was already an engaging character and a very enjoyable character, but his presence just uplifts Stotts, and it's because then Stotts becomes kind of for me at points more of the chief villain than Morgus is. So I would say that what he represents, I think, is better than what he is as a character.
So I agree with you on everything you're saying around what he represents, particularly at the time this story was written, and particularly now.
Mm-hmm.
To give some context, we're recording this on the 16th of January. And at this 2025, and at this point in time, the American government is trying to ban TikTok unless TikTok sells to an American company. And the general belief is that this ban is being driven by American businesses who want the money that's being made from TikTok, and they're claiming that it's to do with national security. So it's very resonant today as we're going through this. There's also, don't want to get too political, but certain elected officials in certain countries aren't there for their political prowess. Let's put it that way. But I think with Morgus, I think he is very much the sort of mustache twirling villain. I think I agree with you. Him coming to Minor was a death knell for him. He never should have left Major. He never should have left the planet. It's fucking stupid.
No.
I think his best scenes are the scenes with him and the president. I actually really liked the president. I liked their dynamic. I liked the fact that like Morgus thinks he's playing this game and the president's like, I know everything. You're not pulling the wool over my eyes. But the bit that I found stupid and that lost the whole thing for him was Morgus randomly assuming that the doctor was a spy for the president.
Mm-hmm.
That is a weird leap in logic that makes no sense. When clearly the spy for the president was the woman who was always in his office.
No.
Because the man is like, he's clearly a savvy businessman. Like you said, it's like, oh, well, we're going to have to close our factories, but unemployment is going to go up. Should put them into the labour camps in the East. And that way I can have the same people working for me, but they're working for me for free. But he's so open about what he's doing in front of his assistant. Like, you're a fucking moron.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's very intelligent, but totally lacking in self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I think his trip to Minor was the worst decision he ever made.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have bothered going to Minor. Things would have worked out much better for him had he not. And if he hadn't gone, they wouldn't have had that final bit of evidence that he was the one causing the whole thing to continue for as long as it did.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's interesting. I think he's a bit cartoony and like he's sort of like that the comparable villain. It's a bit more Doctor Who than Stotts would be.
Mm-hmm.
I found his breaking the fourth wall very off-putting. But I think for the story they were telling, I would agree with you that what he represents is important to have in a story like this. And I think the actor did it well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wouldn't say he's the best villain we've ever had.
No, I definitely agree. And I will save my thoughts on his fourth wall breaking to the overall. But one thing that I will say, and it's a spoiler for my thoughts, is that this is something that I think we have missed an awful lot, is where a villain represents an ideology. For like where there's like a really good team behind the writing here. And when you've got Robert Holmes, who has he hasn't had a spotless record, absolutely not, but he has had some absolute bangers under his pen. And for a guy that's been there since doing this since 1968, he's been there through multiple eras where there has been very different focus on things. So yeah.
Cool. And then lastly, we have Shara's Jack.
Big Phantom of the Opera vibes off him. Huge. He has a cool look. You cannot deny that his look is very enticing and intriguing. His motivation, though, is very confusing. And I think as a villain, where some people would argue he's not the villain, whether you view him as a villain or not, his motivation as a character, for me, makes him a very weak character. Because I don't know whether it's, are you trying to get revenge against Morgus because he left you to die, or because you're no longer good looking? Because he goes on this huge big rant about how I once wined and dined with society and now no one casts an eye on me and whatever the case. And he just goes off on these huge long things, and it's like are you mad because you left it to die, or because you no longer can get the ride? Like I really don't know what it is. And his pining for Peri is like really fucking creepy, and it's like, okay, you're not the first character that has had an infatuation with a companion. nor are you the first character that's, been beaten with the ugly stick that has an infatuation with a character. But Jesus Christ, you're way too over the top. And he talks about it, am I insane? Am I mad? Yes, I am. And it's like, okay, yeah, no, you had a very tragic near-death experience, and it has kind of fucked with your head. It has fucked with your head, and you don't have you're kind of you can go from nice and sedate and charming to completely fucking off the wall. But again, it's your motivation ruins all that, because it's like, are you trying to get revenge on him because he left you to die, or because women won't look at you anymore? And I don't think we've had enough of a proper backstory about him from other sources that can lend any credence to that. Like, no one else seems to talk about him as he was once like an Adonis amongst our people. He was once whatever. It's like, we get none of that. So my investment in him is severely limited.
Yeah, so first of all, his look is part Phantom in the Opera, part Scorpius from Farscape, and part that not clown-looking clown thing that haunted Harry Kim in Voyager. The sort of half base guy, right? Jack is a caricature of a villain. And he's meant to be the tortured villain and whatever. Jack, to me, is this sort of physical embodiment of, how do I describe it? Incel, fucking basement dwelling perverts. Right? I fully am with you, and I'll tell you this 100%. The reason why he's bad at Morgus is because he fucked his face up. It may have started off as this guy betrayed me and whatever. Dude, you have full access to this fucking spice shite, whatever. You could take all of that and fuck off to the planet and never see him again. You could flood the market with it and put him out of business. You're pissed off because your face is fucked up. And because your face is fucked up, you are such a fucking creep. Right? Phantom of the Opera is a very weird story in the musical, when they do the musical of the book, because the Phantom is creepy and possessive in a not very nice way. Because he grooms Christine, and it's very, very fucked up. Jack sees Peri on a camera and is like, oh my god, the first woman I've seen in forever. I will immediately make an android copy of her and keep her as my prize. And like I said before, I will never defend Mariner in that other story. But I can buy Mariner's infatuation with Tegan as being, how do I say this, because I still think it's creepy as fuck, more understandable. Because Tegan's mind was a new experience for him that he'd never experienced before.
And he was also a godlike being that had been flooded with a whole new vast array of emotions and feelings and everything that
he hadn't felt before. Tegan was a new entity. Jack just saw someone with the necessary parts and wanted to get the right. And that's it. The fact that in front of the doctor, he's like pawing at her and whatever. And it's one of the things where I can imagine certain people seeing his sort of, again, his phantom bit at the end, his sort of King Kong-esque bit at the end, or whatever you want to call it, where he's doing everything he can to keep Peri alive while the doctor goes and gets the bat milk or whatever. But it's still, he's not saving Peri to save Peri. He's saving Peri to keep her. Like, he's putting the cold cloth on her head and, like, touching her face and whatever. And, like, I can imagine she's just there, like, oh my God, stop touching me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? And it's just so wrong. It's just so wrong. Anyone who claims he's not a villain, fuck off. Like, he is a villain. He is arguably the villain in terms of emotional threat to our heroes, in terms of the situation as a whole. He's the guy who's killing people and bringing in arms and whatever. But he is so fucking pervy. Oh my God. And the fact the doctor then says, like, keep her alive till I get back. I'm like, take her with you. Take her with you. Don't leave her with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, oh, no. No.
Now that you like talked about King Kong, I'm just potentially controversial take on things. 1933 movie, cinematic masterpiece, characterization of Kong much better done by Peter Jackson.
I agree. I agree. Okay, we now come to the end where we give our thoughts on the story as a whole, and we give the story a score out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
So, Paddy, thoughts and score out of 5.
Cool. So, let's get the minor nitpicks out of the way first of all. I don't know about you, but the constant sinister music was very distracting. Nearly every time Jack was on screen or Morgus was on screen, there was like just someone there with a fucking synthesizer keyboard behind him going dilly 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 or whatever way you want to do it. And it's like, it's very distracting. I actually went back, I looked at a few older villain scenes, confrontation scenes, like to kind of say, like, was this always the thing, or did I just drown it out? And I was like, no. Like when the Doctor and Davros, fuck it, John and the Master. No, like these really intense dialogue scenes where like it was like, yes, we know who's a villain, we know who's being creepy, no music playing. Here it's like, go on.
I was going to say that what you're describing is like, is this the 80s synth version of Sauron's Symphony for Unsubtle Bastards?
Yeah, like, his full body contact chamber orchestra. Or it's like the Eddie Izzard thing of like the orchestra following someone into the fucking forest, But yeah, that's what it was. So I guess I'm going, Christ, I guess it. Charles Jack is a spooky evil man. You don't need to keep hitting me over the head with it. The other thing, Morgus's fourth wall breaks. The first two, they're very minor. It's like, he's like just looks into the camera. It's like the swine or whatever. It's like, right, cool. It's the conversation with Morgan, like, with Stotts and the doctor. It's like, okay, you could say it's Shakespearean. If that's the case, it's bad Shakespearean. Because, like, when, like, other characters, like, was this Edgar? Edmund's the illegitimate bastard in King Lear. So, like, Edmund's, side pieces, like, they're done so much more subtly. Or, I think here it's like really bad improv comedy because he just turns stark around to the camera. Like, you can just imagine, like, if this was a real thing, like, Stotts and the doctor going like, who the fuck are you talking to? Actually, no, it's like in the IT crowd when Richmond does his whole kind of staring off into the distance, and you just see Roy and Moss just kind of look as going, what the fuck is he looking at? So yeah, like the first couple worked fine. The side, monologues or whatever, no, way too distracting, and it actually breaks the immersion for me anyway. So those are the nitpicks. Negatives out of the way. I don't think Jack is a compelling villain. As I said, his motivation really hampers any potential that character had. Also, no, I might be kind of skewed in this because I am currently reading the Count of Monte Cristo, but and I say that because you brought it up. It's a case of you have the sole supply of Spectrox. Why not just financially ruin Morgus? Why not just do like a Black Tuesday Wall Street on him and fucking get rid of him that way? Like, because why are you punishing the and see, this is the thing, is that we've had no basis like for his, as you said, kind of incelish nature. It's like no one else talks about him pre-accident, so we don't know what sort of a pedestal he's on. And like, so why are you punishing the rest of Androzani society for this fucking douchebag's greed? No, don't get me. I think Christopher Gable does like actually a fairly good job in like the quieter moments. I think he's like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of getting the suave nature with this, but as a villain, no, I don't think he's interesting. And Morgus, what the character represents, I think, is better than what the character themselves. So those are the big negatives for me. The positives, it's the type of Doctor Who that I like and have missed and would have preferred to have seen more of for Peter in his run. We got very limited touches of good thematic Doctor Who. And like, I think maybe like Kinda was one story that I can think of, and then we had Frontios was another one, and then we've obviously got this. So I would have much preferred more of this to go into it. Because it actually kind of reminds me of, I suppose, the heyday that would have been Barry Letts' era, because like Barry was very much, let's get these talking points out there. Some great performances from the supporting cast, mainly Robert Glenister's Salatine and Maurice Rose as Stotts. And we talked about like Stotts will definitely go into that, platform of really compelling non-mustache twirling Who villains. And like, I think he's the stronger villain in this story because he's just more engaging and more charismatic. Great performance, I thought, from Nicola Bryant as Peri. We got to see the other side of the engagement in that character. And I thought it was a nice swan song for Peter, who, and again, not everyone agrees upon this, for what me was a less than stellar run for the character. So, no, this story is often lauded as one of the best, if and sometimes voted the best classic era story, or the best story of Doctor Who overall. I am not going to agree with that, but I thought it was a very enjoyable story, and it was a very engaging story, and I wasn't bored watching it. I was engaged with some of the most of the characters, and the teams present. I would definitely watch it again, absolutely, and I think I would rank it at a 4.25.
Okay, it's not bad. Not bad. Let me give it to you.
Yeah.
There we go.
As I said, a lot of people put this on a top pedestal. Not for me, but still, very strong story, I thought.
Yeah. So for me with this, I agree pretty much with most of what you said, to be honest. The bits I didn't like, the end of Morgus, I wasn't a fan of. I thought Morgus was great on Major.
Yeah.
Leave them there. Fantastic. The fourth wall breaks, they were weird, but whatever. I'm not going to knock points for them. I think they were just strange.
Mm-hmm.
But his weird leap to the Doctor's a spy for something. No, I wanted more of him and the President. But I liked that dynamic. I thought that was really, really good. I wanted more of that. I have mixed feelings about the fact that neither the Doctor nor Peri really drive plot, in the sense of, like I said, so everyone here would have been much better off with the Doctor not being there at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they only drive plot by their presence, not by their actions.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad thing, but it's the one thing I think for Peter's last story, I think is actually a little bit sad. If you compare it to Genesis of the Daleks, where for the bulk of the story our characters are just there, and you have Sarah being the damsel in distress and whatever, but eventually it does come around to the Doctor getting involved and having an impact. Jack.
Mm-hmm.
No.
There's no limit.
I think, I mean, we've discussed it before. People know my feeling about a character basically being objectified for the entire story, about creepy, rapey, pervy men in stories. It goes all the way back to the Caves of Mariners. People know, right? And I think there are times when it can add to a story, but when it goes for the full fucking length of it, and when it's done in a way where I think we're meant to feel sympathy for the guy at the end. I'm like, nah, dude, like, bird in the fire. I honestly couldn't care less what happens here. So I wasn't the biggest fan of that. Everything else I actually really enjoyed. It's the first time in a long time that I've been like fully engaged in the episode. I did not take a break. I literally went episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4. I didn't take a break. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't, watch a YouTube video in the middle. I literally went 1, 2, 3, 4 the whole way through, which I always watch it all in one day. But like, I've been really sort of struggling to get through some of the previous stories where I'd watch an episode, I'd maybe read a fanfic, and I'd come back in and watch the next episode, maybe go on Twitter for a while or go on Facebook for a while or whatever, and come back and this one I went episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4. Whole way I thought it was great. It was really engaging. I thought Stotts was a very interesting character. I thought it's some great performances and whatever. It was very reminiscent of a Fourth Doctor Sarah Jane story, like I said. But I saw Bob Holmes' name and my hopes went up. And Bob delivered, and my God, that director delivered.
Mm-hmm.
The directing was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely amazing. I have also seen that it's regularly voted as the best Doctor Who story ever. I also disagree, personally. For me, Genesis of the Daleks, the Romans, the Aztecs,
Inferno,
a couple of other ones that I would definitely put higher than it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the best story of this Doctor's run? Yes, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I give it in terms of a score? I'm going to go with a solid 4, right? Which is the same as what I gave Frontios, right? It's a bit higher than Resurrection of the Daleks for me. I think the bits that bothered me about it, like some of the character stuff that bothered me, things like that, like the Doctor giving up Saladin and a couple of things, kind of knock it down a bit. But it is a really solid story. It is one I would watch again. I mean, I'm glad it's Peter's final story, because if this been his first story and then we got everything we've had recently, that would have been bad. But yeah, so give it a 4.
And I was just taking a look at things there. It's the second highest, for me, it's the second highest rated regeneration story.
But like, I mean, I understand why people really like it. I know our friend Vicky was really anxious for us to watch it, and she was waiting for us to get to this point. And
like, I've seen like discourse around it as to why it's so revered, and like a part, like a cynical part of me is that like, well, it's just because it's the best of a bad lot, in that time period. But then again, you've got people that really hold Peter's era in high regard, and obviously I'm not going to try and shit on that in any way, shape or form. Absolutely not. But there are other stories throughout the show's run that have handled themes of a similar nature or handled different social themes but they've handled it to the kind of a very similar extent. There's been similar levels of threat, similar, like, like I would say more engrossing villains. But again, obviously this story is popular for a reason. And I was watching it and I'm like, no, this is a really, really strong story. I think it is of a different era. And I think it's also a real showcase as to my belief that John Nathan Turner getting in his own fucking way.
Very much so.
Because like if you had put your ego aside and just carried on the legacy of change, spicing things up comes with the nature of the whole thing. Like we saw that with the Third Doctor's era, and then we saw it with the Fourth Doctor's initial run. Whole lot change is a thing, but the legacy remained the same. And I think you got in your own way, and you kind of hamstrung a performance because of that. And like we've talked about in trivia points before, where Peter has like he wanted to push back on stuff, or he didn't think something should be done, but he just, for whatever reason, didn't fucking step up. And it's like, I honestly think that John Nathan Turner really fucking hampered this run.
Yeah, I agree. And I like the fact that Peter got like to have a Bob Holmes do a good story for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I've actually like, it's like a case of now, like, we used to say Graham Harper like directing it, and I'm like, and going through his catalog, I'm like, oh, absolutely fuck yeah! Like his directional style here was really, really good.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to, like we've had it with a couple of mostly we've had it with writers, like I said, Bob being one of them. We've had a couple of other writers.
Yeah, like
were like
John
Grottus is one.
Christopher
Bidmead.
His name escapes me now, but the fella that created Leela, his initial fucking run of stories. Yeah.
Barry Letts himself was very good.
Terrence at times.
Terrence at times.
Yeah. Oh,
except with women.
Yeah. Malcolm Hulk.
Yeah. So, we don't tend to talk about directors as much.
No.
But Graham is a director, and I'm like, I really want to. Like when I saw that list of the other episodes he did, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that explains this. 110%. That explains why this is so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, we've come to the end of Peter's run. Next week, or the next episode that comes out in 2 weeks, will be our rambling as we look back on Peter. Very interesting discussion, to say the least. And then after that, we're continuing on with Colin in the Twin Dilemma.
Which also has its own reputation. So that'll be a very interesting discussion.
I'm aware of what that reputation is. A, because you said to me before. And B, because it's hard to miss in trivia. Because the two of them come up back to back. I'm not going to let that particular reputation spoil my watching it.
No,
so I'm looking forward to Colin. I haven't seen diddly fuck of Colin, bar his future work. So I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah. Welcome to 2025. So long, Fifth Doctor. We won't miss you.
But yeah, no, as I said, like when we do our ramble will be very interesting, I think. And as well, questions, topics, conversational discussion, always welcome. So please fire them away in. But until then, guys, bye.
Bye.